You're wearing a uniform to your wedding. Disgraceful. That was the message. 5 words from a number I hadn't saved in years. My father, retired Colonel Frank Holstead, former 82nd Airborne, forever disappointed in his only child. The text lit up my phone as I stood behind the chapel doors, heart steady beneath my white Navy dress uniform. Gold buttons gleamed. 4 stars on my shoulder. Rows of ribbons decorated my chest like silent sentinels of 25 years. Behind me, my team stood at parade rest. In front of me, 200 SEALs waited. So did the man I was about to marry. The text burned in my palm. I stared at it for a full minute. This is who he is, and this is who I've become. The doors opened. As I stepped forward, the SEALs rose to their feet in perfect sync, and someone shouted, "Admiral on deck!" The chapel echoed with 200 decorated warriors snapping to attention. My throat tightened, not from sadness, from honor. My father wasn't here, but my family was. I was born into the military not by enlistment, but by blood. My father believed in duty above everything: discipline, honor, obedience. In his eyes, only sons were supposed to carry that flag forward. When I was 10, he took me to an Army-Navy game and said, "You'll never wear those colors, kid. Leave the uniform to men who can handle it." I didn't cry. Instead, I listened, watched, remembered. When I told him I'd applied to Annapolis, he didn't speak to me for a year. When I was accepted, he dropped a manila folder on my bed. Inside, applications to law schools, nursing programs, teaching positions. Not a single one with an anchor on the seal. At the Naval Academy, I learned fast that being a woman in uniform meant walking a razor's edge twice as sharp, half as fair. I worked harder, studied longer, endured more. Each time I was promoted, I called him. He never answered. Fast forward to the morning of my wedding. I wasn't nervous. I'd stood on foreign soil with mortars falling around me. My fiancé, James, was a civilian, quiet, intelligent, grounded. He once told me, "You in uniform is the most honest thing I've ever seen. Why would I want you in anything else?" So I wore white, just not his version of it. The SEALs I'd led, fought beside, and bled for showed up uninvited, said they couldn't let me walk alone. I grew up in a house where the American flag flew higher than feelings and where "I love you" was never said out loud. My father wasn't abusive. He was precise. Every inch of our lives was arranged like a parade formation. Colonel Frank Holstead served 3 tours in Vietnam. He earned everything the hard way: Bronze Star, Purple Heart. He kept the medals in a glass case in his study. He called it the altar. I wasn't allowed to touch it. My mother was soft where he was stone. She taught literature, wore flowy cardigans, and read me Emily Dickinson at bedtime. She called me her Stormbird. She was the only reason I didn't leave home at 18. When I received my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy, I held it out like a peace offering. Dad stared at it for 30 seconds, then said, "So you're serious about this nonsense?" He didn't speak to me for 2 months after that. Mom never stopped trying. She called every Sunday during my first year at Annapolis, sent care packages full of tea and annotated poetry. She passed away 3 years later. Breast cancer, fast and cruel. Dad didn't tell me she was in hospice until the final week. She reached for my hand and whispered, "Keep flying." After her funeral, I got an email from my father. 3 sentences. "The funeral was nice. I hope the Navy is treating you well. I still don't understand your decision. Every milestone in my career became a fork in the road, and he always turned the other way." When I pinned on Lieutenant Commander, I mailed him a photo. No response. When I received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, I sent a ceremony link. Still nothing. When I was promoted to Rear Admiral, I sent a handwritten note. I never got a reply, but I heard through a friend that he read the letter 3 times and tore it in half. So when I received that text on my wedding day, it wasn't a surprise. It was a final confirmation. After graduating from Annapolis, I was stationed in Okinawa. My first assignment wasn't glamorous. Most figured I wouldn't last a year. I lasted 5. There was a turning point in 2007, a classified operation off the Somali coast. One of our supply teams was ambushed. 2 injured, 1 trapped. I dragged him 40 yards under fire, cinched a tourniquet with 1 hand, and radioed medevac while holding pressure on his femoral artery. I took 2 pieces of shrapnel through my side. I refused the stretcher. They called me Iceback after that. The kid lived. He still sends me a Christmas card every year. His daughter's name is Avery after me. By 2015, I was commanding training operations at Coronado. I rewrote the training modules, implemented new safety protocols, and mental resilience checkpoints. Within a year, dropout rates dropped by 12%. Injury rates halved. When I made Rear Admiral, I received a standing ovation from my unit. That week, I ran into one of my father's old West Point buddies. He said, "Frank says the Navy is getting soft if they're promoting women like you, but he keeps your picture in his office. Won't admit it, though." There was a moment I can never shake. After a suicide on base, one of our brightest instructors, tucked inside his file was a note. "Tell Admiral Holstead thank you. She's the only one who ever saw me." That night, alone in my office, I pulled off my ribbons one by one and wept. After that, I made it policy. Every unit under my command would have mandatory monthly check-ins. It didn't make headlines, but it saved lives. When the final promotion came to full admiral, the message arrived. 4 stars. No parade, no family. Until a few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, handwritten. "They're just making you a symbol." My father's handwriting. I burned the letter in the sink. Then I ironed my dress whites because I'd need them soon for my wedding. James wasn't military. We met during a Department of Defense working group. He was a civilian intelligence analyst. We collided over protocol. He thought my reporting format was inefficient. I told him efficiency isn't always found in the fastest route. He revised his entire presentation overnight using my format. That was the beginning. When he proposed, it wasn't with flash, just the 2 of us on a pier at sunset. He opened a small box and said, "Let me serve beside you, wherever that means." I just said yes. Planning the wedding was delicate. We decided on the Naval Chapel, simple, formal, respectful. He wore a navy blue suit. I wore my white full-dress uniform. A week before the wedding, I sent my father a card. Inside, I wrote, "I'm getting married this Saturday, 1300 hours at the Naval Chapel. You're welcome to attend. I'll be in uniform." No RSVP ever came. The morning arrived, clear and bright. The SEALs showed up in formation outside the chapel. Men I trained, deployed with, bled for. No one told them to come. They just did. 15 minutes before the ceremony, I stood behind the chapel doors, flanked by 2 retired team members. One leaned in and said, "You walked us through hell. Let us walk you to something better." I was ready, peaceful, until the phone buzzed. "You're wearing a uniform to your wedding, disgraceful." I tucked the phone into my pocket, smoothed my cuffs, and when the chapel doors opened, every man in that room stood. A single voice rang out, "Admiral on deck." My heart didn't race. It settled. I walked that aisle with steel in my spine, not because I was trying to prove a point, but because I didn't have to. To my left, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hill, who once pulled me from a downed helicopter in Kandahar. To my right, Senior Chief Torres, who'd lost a leg in Syria. I saw James standing near the altar. His eyes shimmered. Behind him stood our officiant, a Navy chaplain I'd served with overseas. As I approached, the room fell into perfect silence. Then, Admiral on deck, voices rang in unison. Every soldier, sailor, SEAL, and officer rose in one swift motion. I reached James. The chaplain opened his binder, but waited. Then James stepped forward, took my hands, and whispered, "I don't need to say vows to know I'm already married to your courage." Our vows were simple. We promised to serve each other, to protect not just each other's bodies, but each other's peace. I said when orders come, we follow together. When they don't, we find purpose on our own terms. When the chaplain pronounced us husband and wife, the room stood still with reverence. Then came the applause. We walked out under an arch of crossed sabers. Later at the reception, one of my former SEALs approached me. He said, "We never stood for you because of your rank, ma'am. We stood because you never made us feel small." Then he hugged me tight like a brother. Around midnight, I stepped outside. James found me there, watching the waves. He asked gently, "Did you hear from him?" I nodded. Then I said he called it disgraceful. James asked, "Do you believe that?" I looked down at my uniform, the gold trim, the ribbons, the stars. I thought about the SEALs rising to their feet, the respect in their eyes, the dignity of their salute. I looked back at James. "No," I said, "I don't." It happened 3 days into our honeymoon. We were in Maine. James gently handed me my phone. "You should see this." There was a message from my cousin Claire, a single photo, the parking lot of the chapel taken from across the street. In the corner stood Colonel Frank Holstead, full dress uniform, arms crossed, watching, not entering. And then another photo. A moment later, him mid-turn, leaving. James stood behind me and said, "He came, but he still couldn't stand." Later that week, I received an invitation from the Pentagon. They wanted me to give a keynote on ethics in modern leadership. The night of the speech, I stood in full uniform under blinding lights. I told stories of courage, not mine, theirs. I closed with this. Respect isn't inherited. It isn't given by blood. It's earned by showing up, standing up, and doing right even when no one's watching. There was silence, then a standing ovation. The next morning, a letter arrived at my office. Handwritten, no return address. I didn't enter the chapel because I didn't know how to sit among people who saw in you what I refused to. I didn't salute not because you didn't earn it, but because I no longer knew how to honor what I didn't understand. I was wrong. If you'll let me, I'd like to talk. No uniform, no protocol, just a father trying to understand a daughter he never took the time to know. Frank. I read it 3 times. James came home that evening and found me at the kitchen table. He asked, "Do you want to meet him?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't owe him anything." "No," he said gently. "But maybe you owe yourself the choice." The next week, I met him at Arlington. We stood at my mother's headstone. He wore civilian clothes, no pins, no bars, no armor. Just a man, older, smaller than I remembered. I arrived in uniform. He didn't hug me, just said, "You look like your mother when you stand like that." We talked. Not about the war, not about medals, about grief, regret, how silence can feel like strength but really just hides fear. Before we parted, he stepped back, straightened, and in a slow, deliberate motion he saluted. Not perfect form, but earnest. I returned the salute, not because he'd earned forgiveness, but because finally he'd chosen truth. That night I whispered to James. He saluted. James just held my hand. Months after the wedding, I received a call from Navy Personnel Command. They asked if I'd consider taking oversight of a new Joint Operations Initiative. I accepted. On one of those visits, I ran into Corporal Avery Patterson, the little girl named after me, now in boots of her own. She told me she'd joined because her dad said I saved his life. Then came the final letter. It arrived in late spring. Inside, I watched your speech. I've read your proposals. You built a career that wasn't about proving anyone wrong, including me. You built it to save lives, and I finally see that now. I missed the standing ovation, but I hope I haven't missed my chance to stand beside you even in a small way. Dad. He included a single photo from my wedding taken from a distance. In the image, 200 men stand saluting, and in the back, a lone man, arms at his sides, watching, not saluting. Not yet. Weeks later, I invited him to attend a keynote address. He came, sat in the back, said nothing. But afterward, he walked over, took off his cap, extended his hand. "I took it. I'm proud of you," he said. Then quieter. "And I'm sorry it took me so long." I nodded, not because it fixed everything, but because it started something. 1 year to the day after my wedding, I stood on a stage accepting the Department of Defense's Excellence in Ethical Command Award. James was in the front row. So was my father. As I stepped to the podium, a group of cadets in white stood and saluted. And from the far right corner, so did Frank Holstead, this time with his hand to his brow. Afterward, my phone buzzed. A message from one of the SEALs from my unit. "Still thinking about your wedding day, ma'am. Never seen that many warriors cry during a ceremony." That was the day we realized something. Blood didn't salute, but we did. I typed back. "Some gifts can't be returned, but some salutes, they stay with you forever. Some people say revenge is about crushing what crushed you. But I've learned that the most lasting power is choosing to build what they never believed you could. You don't always have to swing back. Sometimes you just have to stand tall. Let them look up to reach you.